Oh, hi, YouTube. All right, so The Disaster Artist. So I enjoyed this movie. I had a lot of fun with it, but I mean, I expected that. It's definitely the kind of movie that's aimed at someone like me. If you're not super familiar, uh, I love garbage media. A lot of people actually on the previous couple of vlogs commented on this right here. They're like, what is with that? What is that stack? You have a stack of PS3 games sitting there right beside you, and that is the stack of shame. That's from my weekly Twitch streams. We are working our way through mostly PlayStation 3 era, uh, just forgotten, discarded, maybe not very good games. Most of them, the vast majority of them being movie tie-ins. So movie tie-in games, and I, I try very hard to love these, even though they're not worth loving. But the root of this experiment here, of what we're doing with the stack of shame, is to find the the video game equivalent of movies that are so bad they're good. Movies like The Room. So far, right now, we actually have like only three that really meet that qualification. These three right here: 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, Battleship, and Dante's Inferno. Everything else fails in some way. Most of them fail simply by being boring, just like most bad movies. Most bad movies fail simply by virtue of being not very entertaining. They're not fun to watch. You can't say anything about them. They're not interesting. They're just an ugly slog for however long for an hour and a half, for whatever, for 2 hours, for 4 hours, for six. Remaster. So so this is an experiment to try and find that equivalent. And now the room is, or sorry, I shouldn't say the room. The Disaster Artist is a bit of a love letter to so bad they're good movies, but it's also a profile of a very specific one, which is Tommy Wiseau's The Room. And I had a lot of fun with it. It was entertaining. There were parts of it that, for me as an individual, got a little a little too real. So I have worked on some very low budget sets before, where the kind of moments that the disaster artist was recreating from the production of The Room were like, yeah, I've been in scenarios like that. So scenario like, sex scenes where the director clearly doesn't respect the privacy of the actors involved, where safety and health and human services and just the general comfort of the crew and safety of the crew were not high priorities, where food and water were not adequately provided, where working conditions were terrible, and no one in charge cared. Yeah, I've been there. So when they go through the like end of the second act in the movie structure, which is where everything kind of starts to disintegrate and fall apart. Uh, the that part of the movie where they're making the room and Tommy has turned into just a complete ogre of a director, and he's harassing and insulting the crew, and they're working in uh, studio without air conditioning, and there's no water on set, and that chunk of the movie was really uncomfortable. There were some flashbacks. Um, so one time I'm on this set, and for an entire week, the only food that they provide us with are soggy sandwiches, and not normal kind of sandwiches. Like, they didn't get anyone catering to do the sandwiches. They just had somebody in a back room making sandwiches, and I don't know where this person learned to make a sandwich, but it was not earth. They were slicing tomatoes on a cutting board, and then without even mopping up the tomato juice, they would just put bread on it and start making so you would get soggy, like, tomato soaked sandwich, and the sandwich itself would be like, you would get a hummus and tomato sandwich. So bread, hummus, a couple slices of tomato, more bread, and tomato juice has soaked into the bread. It was I tell you what. And then when you're in that scenario, when you're already having a stressful day because there is no budget, and the director and the producer don't know what they want, and everybody's kind of already on edge, and no one knows what they're doing, and you go to lunch and somebody hands you a soggy hummus and tomato sandwich, your soul dies. You just want to curl up and end. So yeah, so that part of the movie was definitely kind of close to home, for me. And the closest comparison that people are going to make, or you're going to hear a lot of comparisons to Ed Wood, and it's a very good comparison because Ed Wood really is kind of the only other sort of recent movie of this kind, and even then it's not that recent. Like, that's 93, 94. So the comparison is good in as far as, like, they follow a similar sort of arc of, like, it focuses on a relationship between two people, and then uses that relationship to form the backbone of the story of the making of a movie. But that's kind of, then they diverge very sharply, actually, from that. Because the thing is that while Ed Wood and Tommy Wiseau are both terrible directors, Ed Wood was a gleeful idiot. He was incompetent as a director. He was no good at it. But by all sort of reports, at least until later in his life, when the booze started to get to him, he was just passionate and incompetent. That a lot of his incompetence came from, like, they would do a shot once and he would just be happy with it. He was overjoyed with it. Things would go wrong and he'd just be like, "We got it. We're good. Let's move on." Whereas Wiseau is an egomaniac. He turned into an ogre on set. He's controlling, he's jealous, he's not a nice person. And so there is kind of a significant divergence in there, whereas where Ed Wood is, in a lot of ways, a lot more of a celebration of one man's misguided passion, whereas this is a lot more about one dude's ego. One of the things that I am kind of two minds about, though, is the framing of the ending. The movie doesn't really hold back. Like, it's okay with painting Tommy in a negative light. It's not a hit piece. It's not out to make him look like a monster, but it's also like it's not afraid to. It's also kind of not afraid to make him look like a monster when he's being monstrous. But at the end of the film, it does kind of fall into this trap of, you know, monstrous directors are ultimately worth it. You know, they invoke Hitchcock and Kubrick, you know, legendary, awful people to work for and work with. And that it's like, oh, but look at the art that they created. And the movie, so The Disaster Artist ultimately kind of comes down a little bit more towards, you know, that like, oh, it was all worth it. But in a way, it really kind of is about the perversion of that auteur theory, like that very specific manifestation of auteur theory, where it's like, you know, that by being a dictator, that by being a monster, that by torturing your cast and crew, that is how you create great art. And this is the counter thesis to that, where it's like, okay, by doing that, you created just accidental art. Like, The Room is awful. It's terrible. It's not good. It is legitimately a very bad movie. It just happens to be a deeply entertainingly bad movie. But yeah, so it's that you have been an ogre, you have been awful to your cast and crew, and you have produced garbage. But that garbage still, on some level, speaks to people for none of the reasons that you intended. I know that Tommy Wiseau has tried to play off The Room as like, oh, it was always meant to be a dark. That's bullcrap. Just look at it. It is clearly 100% sincere, and it is a failure. It is a failure of vision. And so, yeah, so there is kind of this perversion of that theory, and that it's like, you know, you can go there and you can do all of that and you can be awful, and it isn't going to, it's not a magic spell for greatness. But at the same time, it kind of like the final sort of moments of The Disaster Artist sort of fall into this like, well, if people enjoy it, you know, that's all that ultimately matters. And so, yes, it was worth it, even if your vision isn't what ends up coming through. And, you know, I would appreciate that a lot more if the path there wasn't him, you know, humiliating his actress, and stuff like that. One of the other things that the movie doesn't play soft with is acknowledging that Tommy kind of just bought his way in, like that The Room exists because Tommy was already wealthy. It's not the product of, you know, hard work and gumption. It's explicitly the anti-product of hard work and gumption. It's the product of someone who had no talent, got fed up with needing talent, hard work, and luck, and just bought the thing that he wanted, and it's awful. So that dimension of it is a vein that runs through The Disaster Artist. The fact that Tommy basically just was able to buy his dream, and that it's not the product of effort. It's the product of money. And yeah, so there I think it could have gone a little bit harder for that angle, of really kind of embracing the identity of like, hey, the room is ultimately a complete perversion of our normal narrative of hard work, luck, talent. Um, but it goes a little soft on that, but I don't think that's a fatal flaw. It's still a really funny movie. It's still a really enjoyable movie. I had an enjoyable time with it. The the two real moments included. So hey, if you want to see it, you go see it. Go see it. Go see it.